Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is where I get to chat with people I've connected with over the years in the world of arts and entertainment. And today, in this edition of The Singers, I am so glad to have with me Alex Machin. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Hey, Tommy. Pleasure to be here.
I hope that intro was better.
That's great.
We talked about my radio voice before we hitting record.
Yeah.
So, listen, I know that most Canadians who know who you are know you from A Foot in Cold Water, but there's a lot more to your story than that. And one thing I wasn't aware of is that you were born in Glasgow, Scotland, and moved to Canada when you were just 3 years old. So that's... and you don't have a trace of your accent.
No, yeah, because like I said, you said I came over when I was 3 years old. So, my parents all through my life had a totally Scottish accent. And because I was so young when I came here, it just got adapted into Canadian.
Yeah, I mean, I was being facetious, but absolutely, there'd be no reason for you to have an accent today. That said, somewhere along the line, you got interested in being a singer. So what made you decide to step up to the mic or to aspire to that?
When I was young, I'd watch TV and see artists on television. And when I saw Elvis, I was like, 10 years old, I guess. And right from that moment, I saw something that just sparked an interest in me. And I've wanted to emulate somebody like that. And so I started, singing around the house, singing with friends who were, interested in playing music. And we formed a few garage bands, through high school and playing at parties and things like that, and just slowly developed.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. When I ask people what inspired them to get into music, the majority say the Beatles.
Right.
And for me, that was a big part of it too. But when you mentioned TV, that's how I learned how to play guitar. There was so much good stuff. The Ed Sullivan Show, the Tommy Hunter Show. We had all these things on TV with so few channels to choose from, but the material that we could draw from was just amazing.
Well, the talent that was out there at that time is just incredible. Through the 60s and the 70s, it was everywhere. The musicianship, the singers, they were all spectacular back then, right? That's my wheelhouse when I started growing up and being, serious about the music business.
Well, it's interesting, a lot of people griped about the record companies back in the day and how the business end of it really didn't necessarily serve the artist as well. But it was like a filter because there's so much out there now, you just don't know what is what. But back then, if you were on the Ed Sullivan Show, oh my God, there was so much brilliance because there was a filter. And you had to be exceptionally talented to get a record deal in the first place. Now anybody can record an album in their basement or in their bedroom for that matter.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, when he had the Beatles on, look what happened. The explosion in America and the whole music scene changed after that with the British invasion, and people like Elvis were out of business almost. They still had their live performances that they could make lots of money from, but everything was about the Beatles and the British invasion at that time. Right.
Yeah, really. So you went through high school and then you started to do part-time weekend gigs with the local guys?
I just piqued my interest. I wanted to do more and more. The garage band scene and the friends groups sort of waned away, and I started answering ads in the newspaper, and I saw an ad for a singer in the east end of the city. Meanwhile, I lived in the west end, so I'd hop on the subway and go across for rehearsals. And I joined a band called the Christopher Edward Campaign, which had Donnie Underhill, who later became a bass player for Trooper, and Billy Wade, who became the drummer for Moxie. So we would go out and play high schools on the weekend. I had a 9-to-5 job because I just got out of high school. And I found that I was putting my daytime job paychecks in the drawer in my parents' house because I was making more money on the weekends singing in a band. So it was lucrative to me. So I was looking at this as possible career back then.
No kidding. Well, you have a natural voice, I think, and a good range and all that, and your tone is great. Did you have any idea what you were doing as far as technique back then?
No, no, no. Like you said, it just sort of came to me. And, it was pointed out later on the uniqueness of my voice, I guess, the sound, which became evident in the Foot and Cold Water first single, Make Me Do Anything You Want, which is still played today, which amazes me to no end. And yeah, no, it was fun for me back then and lucrative, right? I was making good money and I was still living in my parents' house. So, I had two cars. I was living the life.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Now, before you became a part of the band that would become a Foot in Cold Water, you were playing with Paul Naumann. How did you two connect initially?
So the Christopher Everett campaign had a seven-piece band, horns, and we were doing R&B stuff and Chicago material, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. I liked the guys. And we were rehearsing. One of the band members was a teacher as his full-time gig, and he had access to a school for us to rehearse in. And we were rehearsing in one of the auditoriums or whatever. And Paul Naumann shows up with Kim Hunt, who's the drummer from Zon. And they had started a band called Island. And they approached me afterwards. I had met Kim years before at different jam sessions and loved his drumming. And they approached me that they were starting this band called Island. And I heard Paul play. I went to one of their sessions and we jammed. And I heard Paul play, and instantly I just knew that he was a star. And so I quit the lucrative weekend band that I was making good money at and went into their organization. And we went on from there and started writing songs, Paul and I.
Yeah, now it's interesting that when I talked to Danny Taylor, he said that I guess Paul had been looking for them and they'd been looking for him. And Paul said, you know what? Sounds great, but I'm not going anywhere without my singer. So you made an equally impressive impression on him.
Oh, yeah, they scouted me out pretty good. I mean, I guess Kim knew of me prior to Paul, and he had talked to him about me. And when they came to hear me at the rehearsal, he just sort of went, okay, I think that's my guy. And then when we got to Island and we started writing songs together, we did connect with a bond that I guess he saw continuing to the future, right? So that's what happened when he got the offer to come and try out for Nucleus. He said, I need you to come with me. And I went, sure, because I knew of Nucleus. They'd already had a record out and, did really well for themselves. They were an established band, and I was more than happy to come along and give it a shot.
And we'll be right back after this.
Now, Nucleus was really an eclectic sound. They weren't your standard pop band. So I'm guessing that Island was more mainstream and that's how you guys kind of gelled.
Island was a kind of heavier band actually than Nucleus, and more in the vein of Cream or Led Zeppelin, really. Very heavy. And Paul loved Jimi Hendrix, and he could play everything that Jimmy could play, and idolized him. And what I'm thinking now is that Paul was only like 18 years old, and he was one of the best guitar players in Canada already. So when we joined Nucleus, we went out to jam with them. Instantly, I think they were looking for a change in direction as well. They were so technical and so, intricate in the style of songs that they were playing at the time. I think they already heard Led Zeppelin as well and decided that they wanted to lean into more of that kind of direction. So we actually just gelled together that first rehearsal, and it was like, no problem, let's do this.
Yeah, it's like they were looking for a change and there you guys were. So, yeah, so
And
that
we were all on the same page somehow, right? It was just coincidental. I mean, they knew the talent of Paul, and that's what they were looking for. But then I was part of the package, and we all just looked at each other in that rehearsal and went, wow, this is, I think, something special. Let's go. Let's keep this going,
well,
right?
and
So,
from what I understand too, you were kind of like that slap in the face that they needed because they didn't realize that they needed a singer.
well, they did have Hughie who sang in Nucleus as well, and he was, like a great bass player and a really good vocalist as well. So they could have gone that direction, I guess. But with Paul and I as a package, it just seemed to fit. The first rehearsal, we started playing some of the songs that Paul and I had and jammed on them, and it was, really magical. So we all could see that there was a future.
No doubt, and that certainly worked out. Now, is it true that Frank Davies from Daffodil Records was the one to come up with the name A Foot in Cold Water?
Yes, we were living in a farm at the time, and we'd rehearse all hours of the day because no one was around us. We had 120 acres. It was really quite the lifestyle, which I'm not sure we can go into on the air, but we eventually grew apart from that and started moving into our own locations. And Bob and I had a house in Scarborough where the band used to practice, and somehow we got on Chum Radio with a demo tape or something, and Frank Davies had heard it, and he got interested in the band, and he came over and agreed to sign us to his record label. And a couple of weeks later, he approached us and he said, "Okay, here's the new name of the band that I want you to consider, A Foot in Cold Water." And we all looked at each other and went, huh? What? Yeah, I mean, we liked the name Nucleus. It was strong. It was, already established. And he comes up with this left field name called A Foot in Cold Water. And we went, oh my God. But, he was pretty strong on the idea. So we decided to go with it and see what would happen.
And we all know what did happen. There were 4 albums, and again, the fact that Make Me Do Anything You Want was on the charts not once, but twice by you guys. And then it was covered years later by Helix. So it was a hit 3 times. And as you mentioned earlier, it still gets radio play today. I mean, what's that, 50 years later, and you're still on the radio with that song?
Totally unbelievable. Totally unbelievable. And when the song came out for the first time, like you'd be driving in your car, I would plug in one radio station, like, the push button on the radio in those days. And then you would go to another station and you'd go to a third station and you would be on every station at once. It was really eye-opening. I mean, you were going, oh my God, this is actually quite special. It was unbelievable, really.
And it's crazy, too, that, like you say, that the band was actually a lot heavier than what people realize. And there are other really good songs in that catalog, but that song just took off like a rocket and it kind of just blanked everything out, everything else.
Well, there's no real FM radio stations at the time. It was mostly AM. And if you wanted to get heard, you had to come up with something that would be AM friendly. And that's why we went in that direction for that song. Danny Hall got together and wrote that song. I was supposed to be there that night, but I think the Leafs were playing and I missed the chance. But
that's when the Leafs were still contenders.
Unfortunately for me. Yeah, so they come up with that song and it turned out to be the most radio friendly song we could have ever come up with because, like you said, it's still going strong after 50 odd years. And it was just nominated for the Hall Writer Song of Fame, right? And we...
Editor's note, Make Me Do Anything You Want was inducted into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2021. Now back to the show.
We played that show a couple of years ago.
I saw that video. That was pretty cool, actually, yeah. And from what I understand, you weren't sure if you were up to the performance. So I know that when I looked over your website, you'd taken some time off from performing. So what was that like getting back into shape for that?
Well, being the singer, You're the one who's out front. You're the one that everybody recognizes because they've heard your voice so often, especially in that song, that you're hesitant because you're out of practice. Use it or lose it, right? I think it was a couple of years that we hadn't even rehearsed, or I don't sing around the house. There's not really a call for me to do that. So, yeah, you're always hesitant, you're nervous, you don't want to make a mess of it because we heard that it was being filmed for posterity, and also the video was being made, and you just get anxious about things like that. Being a singer, like you're so upfront, it's a little bit scary here and there. So anyway, I did agree. Danny talked me into it, and I'm so happy I did because it worked out really well.
It sure did. Now, inevitably, Foot in Cold Water would come to a head. And so the band broke up for the first time. And
Right.
then you got on a plane and headed out to LA. And from what I understand, you were a staff songwriter for United Artists for a few years. So that's a little different.
Yeah, no, that was just an opportunity that arose when I was there. Well, first of all, what happened, the band dissolved. We were on our final tour before we were going to all go to California. The band was going to do this last tour, take the money, and we were going to move to California and give it a shot down there. But halfway through the tour in Calgary, Paul Naumann decided he was going to leave the band. So that was like, what? We were all totally unaware that this was even a possibility.
And we'll be right back after this.
So he leaves the band and we go home in the middle of a tour, broken up, no more band. So it was quite alarming, and we were all wondering what our future would hold. And so Paul would call me. He went to California by himself, and he'd call me for a year. And every time he called me, I hung up because I was angry with him for leaving our band and breaking it up. And finally, after a year, he had convinced me to come down and spend a couple of weeks and just see what I thought. He had a band completely set up in a rehearsal hall. They learned a bunch of Foot and Cold Water just to get me climatized to the music. And lo and behold, I got back on board and joined his organization down there, and we started rehearsing every day. We had backers, money, and set up in rehearsal halls, and we all had apartments in LA, and so it was a pretty good life. And I went, sign me up again, here I go. And that's how that started. Then Paul and I, again, after years of being together, sort of had disagreements, and he went his way, I went mine, and then I had to start figuring out what I was going to do in California. So I made a demo tape and shopped it around, and United Artists decided they would sign me as a staff songwriter.
That's really interesting. Now, at the same time, you did some demos, and I watched some of the videos for Sin Sensation, for example, and Kiss the Night Away. One of the things I noticed is you were actually playing guitar. You're playing looks like a 1960s Stratocaster.
Yeah, that was it. It was a 64 candy apple red, real deal Stratocaster. Yeah, worth $50,000 today. Yeah, that was my guitar. But when Paul left, of course, I had to pick up the guitar, which I knew how to play previously, but never played in the band. And I had to start writing my own songs by myself. So just out of need, you had to adapt. And I started writing and started with United Artists. They gave me a 4-track tape machine. I had a house in Burbank, and they set me all up, and life was good for sure. And I would start writing demos, and they would form musicians around me to go in and record these demos, and that was the result, the little demo tapes that we did for videos of the songs. And yeah, it was a great time in my life. I mean, so many experiences. Now that we're talking about all this, it's just bringing back so many memories. It's been quite the life.
Yeah, now that music was actually very much of the time. It kind of reminded me of Loverboy and or REO Speedwagon. So it's a mystery to me as to why it didn't take off, because it was right up there with all that other awesome music from the time.
That's exactly what I was aiming for, because my interest and the singers that I liked all along were the ones that had the popular music. I'm not talking about pop records. I'm talking about, your Foreigners and your Mark Farners, Paul Rogers, all those kind of guys, Don Henley, right? The good songs that everybody seems to like. That was the kind of vein that I was trying to write in to make things commercial, but still really, really melodic, right?
And that is key. I know a lot of guitar players, as I'm sure you do, and a lot of musicians who don't know how to play for the song. And that's what I picked up there is that you were singing and playing for the song, and everything was to that end, serving the song.
Yeah, no, to me, less is more. If it's good, it's instantaneous. You can feel it, you can hear it. And to me, anyway, like I said, I liked all those artists that I mentioned because of the voice mainly. That's always what attracted me to different songs, right? If the guy is a great singer, I instantly gravitate towards their music.
And this brings us to the end of part 1 of my conversation with Alex Machin. He had a lot more to say, and we will hear that in part 2. Now, in the meantime, for your listening pleasure, here is the classic song that A Foot in Cold Water had a hit with twice a few years apart, Make Me Do Anything You Want. Enjoy.
In the morning light, feels so good by me. It could be so right, you and me tonight. Make me do anything you want. 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 Make me do anything you want.
Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production, meaning that I've done all the work, including recording, editing, guest acquisition, etc. And hey, here's some news. We've just recently joined forces with 519 magazine, so you can check out my interviews there as well. The theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a clip from my original composition, The Burn, all rights reserved. If you enjoy the show and you'd like to help us keep it going, why don't you click on the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. Hit the like button, subscribe, all that stuff. We really appreciate it. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. And until next time, cheers.